The story of Cinderella doesn't actually start with a glass slipper. Or, for that matter, a fairy godmother. The first Cinderella was a real person, a Greek slave who lived 2,600 years ago. And she didn't wait for a prince to save her. She bought her own freedom and became one of the most successful businesswomen of the ancient world. Her name was Rhodopis, and her legend was hijacked. By the end of this investigation, you won't just know her real name. You will understand the 2,600-year-old secret of why history erased the powerful, independent woman she was and replaced her with the passive, waiting princess we all think we know. This is the story of the real Cinderella and the conspiracy to hide her true identity. When you think of Cinderella, the images are instant. A kind girl covered in soot, dreaming of a better life. The wicked stepmother, the cruel sisters, the magical intervention of a fairy godmother. A pumpkin transforms into a coach, and rags become a ball gown. There's a handsome prince, a magical knight, and a single glass slipper left behind on the palace steps. It's a perfect symbol of hope. The idea that a single object can prove your true worth and deliver you to a happily ever after. It's the ultimate story of wish fulfillment. We all know it. We've seen the movies, we've read the books. It's a foundational myth of our childhood, promising that even in the darkest of circumstances, goodness will be rewarded, and you can be rescued from your life and elevated to a throne. The slipper is the key, the 1 in a billion chance that proves you are special, that you are the one who was meant for more. But what if I told you that almost every single element of that story is a modern invention? What if the original story had no fairy godmother, no pumpkin coach, and no midnight deadline? The oldest versions tell a much stranger and far more powerful story. The magical helper was something else entirely, a god in the form of an eagle. The prince was no prince. He was a pharaoh, a living god on earth. And where our heroine wasn't a girl waiting patiently by a fireplace. She was a real woman named Rhodopis, and her story is less about wish fulfillment and much more about survival, ambition, and a historical cover-up that has lasted for millennia. To find her, we have to peel back the layers of fantasy that have been carefully placed over her true story. Our first stop is a far cry from the gentle tale we know. The version of the story recorded by the Brothers Grimm. Aschenputtel is raw and brutal, and it contains the first major clues to the narrative's original primordial purpose. The most shocking moment, the one that has been systematically scrubbed from modern retellings, is the shoe test. When the prince arrives with the golden slipper, not glass, the first stepsister's foot is too big. The mother, driven by a desperate hunger for power and status, doesn't just sigh in disappointment. She hands her daughter a knife and says, "Cut off your toe. When you are queen, you will no longer have to go on foot." The daughter obeys, slicing off a piece of her own body to fit the shoe. She fools the prince. But as they ride off, Aschenputtel's magical doves cry out, look back, there's blood on the shoe." Then comes the second sister. Her foot is also too large, but her heel is the problem. Again, the mother commands her to mutilate herself, saying, "Cut a piece off your heel. When you are queen, you will no longer have to go on foot." And again, she obeys, carving away at her own flesh. And if you want to get to the real meat of these stories, make sure you hit subscribe. This detail is so much more than just a dark moment. It's the core psychological engine of the story. It reveals the shoe is anything but a romantic symbol. In this version, it's a brutal instrument of social mobility, an unforgiving standard of worth. This horrifying act of self-mutilation is more than just a gruesome detail. It's the distorted echo of a much older, even more extreme test. The modern Cinderella is defined by her kindness and her almost saintly ability to forgive. Aschenputtel is not. In the Grimm's version, the story does not end when the slipper fits. It ends with a wedding and with a final terrifying act of justice. At the royal ceremony, as Aschenputtel walks down the aisle, her wicked stepsisters try to curry favor, hoping to share in her newfound wealth and power. But Aschenputtel's magical doves, who have been her helpers throughout the story, descend upon them. They don't just celebrate. They attack the stepsisters, pecking out their eyes and leaving them blind for the rest of their lives. This is a crucial detail that has been systematically erased. The original heroine is hardly a passive victim who is simply rewarded. She is an agent of justice. The story, in this form, has little to do with turning the other cheek. It's a chilling tale about karmic retribution, where the punishment fits the crime with terrifying biblical precision. They made her life a world of darkness and soot, and in the end, their world becomes one of eternal darkness. This theme, a shoe serving as a brutal test of identity and a catalyst for either reward or horrific punishment, is the key. The Grimms didn't invent this. They were simply recording the latest iteration of a narrative fragment that was already ancient. They were cultural preservationists, capturing the oral traditions that were fading away. And in doing so, they preserved the violence and the core symbolism of Aschenputtel. But the original meaning, the true purpose of the story, was even deeper. That raw, violent desire to fit the shoe, to prove one's worth even at the cost of one's own body, is a clue that points us further back in time. It's an echo of a time when a shoe wasn't merely a test for a girl trying to win a prince. It was considered a divine message sent to a king. The Grimm's version, with its bloody shoes and pecked-out eyes, is the last and most distorted echo of a much older story. It retains the brutality, but has lost the context. To find the source of that echo, to understand what that golden slipper truly represented, we must dig deeper. We must follow the breadcrumbs of this narrative back through time, past the folklore of Europe, beyond the Middle Ages, and travel another 2,000 years to the sands of ancient Egypt. There, on the banks of the Nile, we will find the first Cinderella and the truth of her identity. Our investigation begins in the 5th century BC with the father of history himself, Herodotus. In his masterpiece, The Histories, instead of telling a fairy tale, he's providing a historical report on a real woman, a figure of some celebrity in the Greek world. Her name, he tells us, was Rhodopis, a Greek name meaning rosy cheeks. She was, according to his sources, a Thracian woman, captured in her homeland and sold into slavery. Herodotus notes, remarkably, that she was a fellow slave of the legendary fable-teller Aesop on the Greek island of Samos, under a master named Iadmon. This detail alone is staggering, placing two monumental figures of Western tradition in the same household. Rhodopis was eventually brought to Egypt during the reign of Pharaoh Amessis II and sold to a new master. But her story doesn't end in servitude. In Egypt, she worked as a hetera, a high-class courtesan. She was so successful, so desired, and so skilled in her profession that she earned vast sums of money. She became so wealthy, in fact, that her freedom was purchased for an enormous price by the brother of the famous poet Sappho, a man named Charaxus, who had fallen in love with her. After gaining her freedom, Rhodopis continued to work and became so rich and famous that Herodotus claims her name was known throughout the entire Greek world. This is our baseline. The first Cinderella was, in reality, a documented and financially independent woman, a world away from a cinder maid waiting by the hearth. Herodotus tells us that Rhodopis operated in the city of Naucratis. Forget any idea of a mythical kingdom from a storybook. This was a real city, a bustling and strategically important Greek trading post on the Canopic branch of the Nile Delta. Archaeologists have excavated its ruins, confirming its existence and its unique character. Naucratis was a special economic zone, a cultural crossroads where Greek merchants, Egyptian officials, and people from across the Mediterranean mingled. The commerce here was incredibly broad, including not only goods like grain and pottery, but also ideas, cultures, and social norms. This context is absolutely crucial to understanding Rhodopis' story. Ancient Egypt was, for the most part, a deeply conservative and hierarchical society. But Naucratis was a liminal space, a threshold between worlds. It was one of the very few places in the entire kingdom where a foreigner, and a woman no less, could defy the rigid social structure, accumulate her own wealth, and carve out a measure of autonomy. The story of the first Cinderella unfolds in a real, historical place, a far cry from a fantasy castle. It's grounded in a city known for its social fluidity and its opportunities for those daring enough to seize them. Rhodopis wasn't just successful. She was successful in a specific place that made her story possible. She thrived in a melting pot, a city that proves her legend has one foot firmly planted in reality. For 500 years, that was the story. Rhodopis, the brilliant, self-made businesswoman. Then, around the 1st century AD, the Greek historian and geographer Strabo writes his account, and everything changes. This is the moment the historical woman is laundered into a myth. This is where the powerful entrepreneur is replaced by the passive princess. Strabo tells us that one day, while Rhodopis was bathing in the river, an eagle swooped down from the sky, snatched one of her sandals, and flew away. The bird didn't just drop it somewhere in the desert. It flew all the way to the capital city of Memphis, where the pharaoh was holding open court, and dropped the sandal directly into his lap. The pharaoh, we are told, was amazed by this strange event and by the beautiful, unique shape of the sandal. He declared it a divine sign, an omen from the gods. He immediately sent his men across the entire kingdom of Egypt with a single command: find the woman who fits this sandal. His men searched every town and village until they finally arrived in Naucratis, where they found Rhodopis, the owner of the mysterious shoe. They brought her back to the pharaoh, and as soon as he saw her, he made her his queen. This is the pivotal moment in our investigation. This is the fulcrum upon which history turns into legend. Why did the story change so dramatically? Why erase the successful, independent woman and replace her with a passive heroine chosen by fate and a lost shoe? The answer isn't in the story. It's in the culture that retold it. The key to unlocking that question, the clue that decodes the entire myth, is the eagle. To a modern reader, a shoe-stealing eagle is a bizarre, almost comical plot device. But to an ancient Egyptian or a Greek living in Egypt, it was a profound religious symbol. The falcon or the eagle was the sacred animal of the god Horus, the god of the sky, kingship, and the divine protector of the pharaoh himself. The pharaoh's status was elevated beyond that of a mere king. He was seen as the living embodiment of Horus on earth. Therefore, an eagle, the messenger of Horus, delivering an object directly into the lap of the living Horus, was interpreted as a divine command, a world away from being a simple coincidence. Strabo's story reveals a much deeper layer than a simple romance about a shoe. It's actually the story of a god-king receiving a direct order from his patron deity, instructing him on who he should choose as his queen. The story was altered to provide a powerful, divine justification for what would have otherwise been a politically scandalous act. A pharaoh, likely Amasis II, marrying a foreign-born commoner, a former slave and courtesan. So, do you think this was a clever political move? Or a genuine belief in a divine sign? The myth wasn't created to explain her rise to power. It was created to legitimize it, to frame it as the will of the gods, silencing any and all earthly criticism. The fairy tale is, in reality, ancient political propaganda. And this brings us back to her true identity. The name Rhodopis, Rosy Cheeks, was almost certainly a professional name, a brand. It evokes beauty, health, and desire, a perfect moniker for a celebrated courtesan whose services were in high demand. Herodotus's account gives us a woman with immense agency, a person who navigates a complex and often brutal world and builds a legacy through her own intelligence, charisma, and business acumen. Strabo's version systematically strips her of all that agency. She is no longer the protagonist of her own life. She becomes a passive object chosen by a god and a king. Her success is no longer her own. It is a gift granted to her from on high. Her story is reframed from one of personal achievement to one of divine selection. And this is the 2,600-year-old secret. The story of Cinderella has a meaning that goes far beyond a poor girl becoming a princess. It's actually the story of how society, through its myths and legends, took a powerful, independent, and perhaps threateningly successful woman and demoted her into a passive damsel. They made her story more romantic, more palatable, and far less threatening to the established patriarchal order. The oldest Cinderella wasn't waiting for a shoe to save her. She was the one who had earned it. The tragedy is that for 2 millennia, we have celebrated the pale reflection, the waiting princess, while the real powerful woman has been buried in the sands of history. So, a shoe was never about finding a princess. It was about authenticating a divinely chosen queen. But what happens when the test of royalty is so sensitive it can be felt through 20 mattresses? The 2,000-year-old secret of The Princess and the Pea hides an even more disturbing truth about purity, power, and what it really means to be royal. Click the video on your screen right now to continue the investigation.